You're in Vancouver, Canada?
I live in Vancouver. Yeah, I'm in Atlanta right now for another 3 weeks. Just finishing up a movie here, and then home again.
Good. I love Vancouver. One of my favorite
Yeah.
places.
Where are you right now?
I'm in Canada. I'm in Toronto.
Oh, are you in Toronto? Okay, cool. Right on. My
Yeah.
daughter goes to Western, so she's not far from you. Nice,
No,
nice.
no, that's like a couple hours.
Yeah, nice to see you have
Yeah,
power.
no. What was the power?
Yeah, it's nice to see you have power with all the ice storms and nonsense that are going through southern Ontario and Quebec.
Yeah, it was quite insane. We didn't get affected by power, but I mean it was a lot of snow. I know in Montreal right now they're getting affected quite a bit.
Wow.
They had a lot of power outages there. But but yeah, but Vancouver is it's been a while now. I've been there. There was a time between 2009 and 2017. I was there twice a year just for work, happened to be
Yeah.
there for work all the time. And I always would go to either Banff or I would go to Whistler or,
Nice.
obviously Banff is way far off from there, but just make a point of going there.
Yeah. Well, you're all the way out there. You might as well take the extra trip, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for joining, man. I appreciate it. How would you like me to address you, as Kim or
Just
C
Kim. Yeah,
or
Kim's great. No, Kim's good. Yeah. Yeah.
great? Just to start off, Kim, just talk to me about how you got started in cinematography, your career, how it evolved to where it is right now.
Oh, that's a long story. How much time do you have?
Go.
I grew up in it's a good one. I grew up in Malaysia. I was born there, and my dad was a not a missionary, but he went over with the Methodist school system back in the 50s and started teaching there, and he loved it so much that he never came back. Um, so I was born there, grew up there. At the school that I went to, my best friend, Justin, was the son of a couple that owned a production company. So all growing up, it was kind of, in the background on weekends, whatever. There was always movie business in the background. They made commercials, but same sort of idea.
Mm,
Um, and after high school was over in 1988, um, he said, "Why don't you come and you got time before college? Why don't you come and be a grip with me? I'm going to go work for mom and dad. So come be a grip." And I was like, "What's a grip?" And that was kind of the end of it. So we worked in house there, starting in '88. So when I was 15, I went through the English school system in Malaysia, so we graduated a little bit earlier than is
right.
normal here. Um, and kind of fell in love with it a little bit, and worked as a grip in house there for a little bit, shooting commercials, and then um, noticed that the camera department was where all the action was. So I was always kind of pestering the camera
Right.
guys to let me play with the gear. We had all our own equipment in house, and so I was always in the camera room messing around with stuff, getting in their way, and all that. And then at one point they decided, Justin's dad decided that he wanted to rejuvenate the still photography side of the business. He was a still photographer before he went into motion picture. And I was
Okay.
really into stills. So I thought, well, why don't you go to school, get your degree in stills, and then, maybe we'll rejuvenate that, put you to work here. So that was kind of the plan to begin with, was to go and work in stills and commercial photography. So I went to the University of Victoria, um, partially because they had a BFA program in stills, but mostly because the girlfriend I was going out with at the time was going to Burnaby, so I followed. And
Okay.
ended up staying in Victoria. But I would go back in the summertime and be a camera assistant and mess around and kind of grow in the business that way. The stills idea never came through, but the motion picture side of it kind of did. And anyway, I grew apart from the business a little bit in the early '90s. Settling into life in Victoria, I'd gotten married and was kind of going down a different path. And then
Right.
Justin had actually come and been my best man at our wedding, and he said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "You're a filmmaker. Why are you doing whatever you're doing?" At the time, I think I was about to join the police department in Victoria. So
Oh, nice.
yeah, he said, even if it's just, never mind all the other, serving the community, all this other nonsense. He goes, "How about money?" He goes, let's just talk about money. How much money are you going to make as a police officer? So he made a very compelling argument that the movie business is more lucrative than civil service. But he started his own company in the early 90s, and I went back to Malaysia. Joanna, my wife, and I packed up, moved to Malaysia in '96 to go work with Justin now, who had basically taken over the business from his parents, and
Right.
was a camera assistant in-house with him, and then started doing a little bit of freelance work. And we met a Canadian director named Jerry McKenna, who was formerly an agency creative director who was now directing commercials. And he took a shine to me a little bit, I guess. And he called. I remember he called one day and he said, "Hey, 3 weeks from now, what are you doing?" And I said, "I've got nothing booked." He goes, "Okay, you're coming and doing a commercial with me." And I said, "Okay, great." And I'm like, "Why are you, like, you're directing? Why are you booking the camera department crew?" He goes, "No, you're shooting it." And I said, "Shooting?" I said, "I don't know anything about shooting. All I know is, near and far and, in focus, out of focus. That's all I know. I don't know anything about shooting." He said, "Well, it's too late. I've already gotten you approved by the agency,
Oh,
and
wow.
you're booked." So that was how I got shoved into it by Jerry, bless his heart. And then we went on together to shoot a whole bunch of stuff. I think we shot the first commercials that ever aired in Vietnam back in 1997 for what were the products? It was Head and Shoulders and Tide laundry soap. So that was lots of fun. And then things kind of just evolved from there. And in
Yeah.
'98, all the economies collapsed in Southeast Asia. So we decided, well, despite wanting to live in Malaysia permanently, we thought, well, let's go back to Canada and see what's going on. So I came back to Canada. I was 25, I guess, if it was 1998, and I shot 30 some commercials, like high end commercials that we do over there. We don't. The commercial industry there is more narrative. It's more like the European industry rather than the North American product placing industry.
Yeah.
So I had a pretty nice reel, I thought, but nobody would take me seriously here. "Oh, you're 25. How could you possibly be a DP? You're way too young." So ended up
Yeah.
gaffing a few shows in Victoria for other DPs and learned some tricks from them along the way. And then a gentleman named Kirk Shaw came along, and a director named David Dakota in 2004 or something, I think. And they had an 8-day feature they wanted to shoot. And I thought, you know what, this is it. Got to do it, right? You can't pass up an opportunity. So I did that, and then ended up shooting 30 some odd movies with Kirk Shaw producing, with directors like Ron Oliver and George Ershbaumer and George Mendelek. And then one thing led to another, and I got asked to come and do Arrow, and that led to Flash, and then Flash led to Welcome to Marwen, which was kind of a bizarre chain of events.
Chain of events, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
fantastic. I really find it really cool that Jeremy, I think you said, right? That how he
Jerry.
booked you
Yeah,
without, he had so much faith in you that it's good to have people like that they just put, and then and you want to prove them then, right? Like you're going to work harder than you normally would.
yeah,
And that is so cool. I it's rare to hear these kind of things, and I find that really, really nice and really cool on his part.
yeah. He was really great. He was a real gentleman. He was a big personality. He was a 6'4" Canadian fella in Malaysia, so he towered about a foot taller than anybody else. And he had a very big presence, but he was a real teddy bear. He was a great guy. Yeah.
Nice, that's great.
Yeah.
And then welcome to Marwen. For you to be working on all the projects that you did, and then to get called on a project by Robert Zemeckis, someone who I'm sure you have too. We've all sort of grown up on, like, Back to the Future, Forrest
Yeah.
Gump, Contact, all these great films. Well, how did that happen? And just sort of run me through, your meeting with Zemeckis and how it kind of went from there.
Well, that whole period. There was a period of about 3 months there where it was just everything was so bizarre. I didn't know what was happening. So I was working on Flash at the time, the TV show,
Right.
and I was at work. It was like I think it was like a Tuesday or a Monday or Tuesday. It was early in the week, and we had a huge schedule ahead of us. Lots of visual effects, lots of stunts, and all that. And Flash is an ensemble show, so there's complicated scenes with lots of cast members, so you spend a lot of time shooting. Anyway, my agent called and said, he goes, I don't know what's going on right now, but Robert Zemeckis' office just called to see if you were interested in making a movie with him. And I was like, what? Like Robert, like, how do you spell Zemeckis? Like, he goes, no, it's legit. It's the real guy. I checked it up. And I said, yeah, of course I'm available for, I grew up with movies that Bob's made, and Gump and Back to the Future is in my opinion, some of the greatest films that have ever been made by contemporary
Yes.
filmmakers. And if you'd asked me to pick from a list of Hollywood directors to work with, Bob would have been the guy. So this was all a really strange sort of set of circumstances. So they said, well, my agent Brady said, well, don't quit your job yet. I'll let them know you're interested, but I'll let them know, and then in a couple of weeks, if we haven't heard anything, I'll reach back out to them. So in the meantime, don't quit your job, but it's good to be on the radar, right? I was like, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So an hour later, Brady calls back, goes, they want you to read a script like right away, like tonight, if you can, have a meeting tomorrow morning. And I was like, well, we've got a huge schedule. I can, maybe do something early tomorrow morning. I can get everyone at Flash, like get the operator and the gaffer to do all the morning blockings, and I can, scamper away and try to do a meeting. So the next morning, they sent a script, and the next morning, Steve Starkey, one of Bob's longtime producers, called, and he said, he goes, I don't know if you know who I am or what's going on. I'm like, oh, I know who you are. Like, come on, and he goes, okay, well, he goes, I've got a movie I want to pitch you, and let me, if it's too crazy, just say so. It's I totally get it. It's kind of out there, and and I said, honestly, Steve, there's nothing you could pitch me that I would turn down that I would say was too crazy. So, so he pitched me the whole story, and I'd read the script the night before, and I was getting kind of nervous. He said, look, don't be nervous. He goes, it's just two guys talking about a movie. Don't worry about it. It's all good, And so our conversation went really well. And then he said, look, Bob's really anxious to meet you, and he's got a bunch of test footage that we did a little while ago that he wants to go over with you to get your opinion on. So this was a Tuesday, I think. He said, why don't you come down for lunch on Saturday? We'll fly you down and come meet Bob, look at this test footage, and we can have a chat. So that was a Tuesday. So by the Saturday, I was on the air. In fact, it was Friday night. We were shooting on Flash. Everybody on the crew on Flash was so excited for me. And the transport department said, you leave your car at the studio. We'll drive you to the airport. So they drove me to the airport. I flew down to LA. Air Canada lost my bags, of course. I drove up to Santa Barbara because Bob's office is in Carpinteria. And the next morning, I'm in the same clothes that I traveled in because I've got no bags, and it's 9 a.m. And I'm kind of walking around Carpinteria trying to find his office, and there's no sign or anything. And well, this is the address. This must be it. And I kind of walk up to the door and open the door, and there's like kind of an empty reception area, and I could hear voices down the hall. And I poke my head in, and I look to the left, and there's the plutonium container and the hoverboard from Back to the Future.
Oh,
nice. I'm like, all right, this is the right place, I guess. And I'm like, hello, and Derek Hogue, who is Bob's right-hand assistant and also post-production producer, comes down the hall. He goes, oh, you must be Kim. He goes, hang on a second. And he pokes his head in this office. The door was closed, and he opens the door, and he goes, hey, Bob, Kim's here. And the first thing I ever heard Bob Zemeckis say in real life was, I gotta call you back, and click. And then he comes out, and he's like, hi, nice to meet you. And yeah, we had this really candid conversation about, life. And Bob's a pilot. We're both private pilots, so we had a little bit of a connection there to talk about, to break the ice. And we talked about that, talked a little bit about movie making in general, and then got into the movie. And it was like, kind of the bizarreness of the whole situation just kind of continued. And I said, how did this come about? Like, how did you end up in me? Like, of all people in the world. And he was like, well, it's the kids watch Flash. And he goes, I just noticed your work on the TV, and we'd interviewed a bunch of people. It wasn't clicking with anybody, and he said, let's check this guy out. So that's kind of how it all came together. I mean, part of it was that they wanted to shoot in Vancouver, so that it didn't hurt that I was local to Vancouver as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, and 4 or 5 weeks later, the deal was done, and we were starting prep. So it was, it was crazy. But
That's such a great story. That's
yeah,
such a great story.
yeah. I've always believed that everything happens for a reason, and every setback you have when you look back on at least when I look back on my career, every setback that I've had has always led to an opportunity that went somewhere else. And it's, and this was, I think the rumor has it that, the episode that he saw was the musical episode. And I don't know this for sure, but if it was the musical episode, when we started Flash back in 2013 or whatever it was, Greg Berlanti, our executive producer, was a huge fan of doing musical episodes, and he came from Glee, and nobody in the writers' room really wanted to deal with writing a musical superhero episode. And it kind of became this like running joke between me and the writers' room. Every time I talked to anyone down there, they'd be like, "Hey, how's that musical episode?" And they'd be like, "I don't, we don't want to talk about that. That's not happening." And then, but 3 years in, Greg finally said, "Look, we're doing a musical episode," and that was one of the best scripts I think in the entire show that I did. And I think that was I've been told that was the one that Bob saw, and if that's the case, then hey, there's that everything for a reason thing happening again. Right?
It's so true about that, because the setback and how things kind of unfold later on in life or later on in a few years. I had a similar thing where we were working on this feature narrative documentary. We were like 10 days into it, and it just fell apart, and I don't want to get into that why, but we because of that, I was introduced to someone who introduced me to someone else, and I ended up making a feature narrative documentary, and that just kind of opened up a slew of contacts and opportunities just because
Yeah.
of that setback,
Yeah.
at the time, which looked extremely terrible, and
Yeah.
it was tough to deal with, but it just opened up so many doors, and that's so true. We just don't see it. Sometimes we don't see it for 10 years,
Yeah.
we just don't know.
Yeah.
But it's incredible, man. I'm so happy for the way your story is and the way you told it. It's such a cool story, and I loved listening to it. So thank you
Oh,
for
thanks.
sharing that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Anytime.
When you were working, so let me, before we talk about Welcome to Marwen, we I just want to talk about your process, right? Like, storytelling takes place everywhere. It takes place in the lenses, it takes place with the set design, art direction, effects,
Yeah.
post-production. When there's a scene that you have to shoot, whatever that scene is, dramatic or action, the selection of lenses, right? Like, are you on 24, 28, 35? Is that something that you kind of talk to the director with? Take one project, for example, or is that something that you sort of work in your head? What's that process like?
Depends on the show, and it depends on the director. So if it's something like if it's a director like Bob Zemeckis who understands lenses and is more sort of in
Yeah.
tune with the technical side of things, then yeah, we talk about lensing. We talk about a little bit about the philosophies of what we want to do in terms of the storytelling in the show. Do we want to start the show close and wide and follow a character arc by tightening lenses, or vice versa, or things like that? There's always, for me, there's always a narrative reason to make lens selections and focal length selections, and those don't necessarily aren't necessarily a catch-all for the entire movie. They evolve as the story progresses for me.
Yeah.
There's a show I did called Yellow Jackets for
Yes.
Showtime, and Yellow Jackets was a story about a present day a group of ladies that had gone to high school together 15 years ago, and it's how events that unfolded 15 years ago relate to the present day. And we knew that we wanted to have. I didn't shoot the pilot, so I wasn't really ahead of the early decision making, but I started on episode 2. And it had been a long time since they'd shot the pilot because of COVID and everything else. So we kind of had a clean slate to start from. So on that show, I worked with the showrunners more than anybody, Ashley and Bart and Jonathan Lisco, and we talked about, how do we want to make these worlds look different? So we chose to use ARRI signature primes in the present day for a nice, clean sort of honest, no nonsense kind of view of the world. Because they're very, signatures are very, very clean, very flattering, very modern glass. And so we chose those in slightly longer focal lengths to portray the present day. And because the characters were introverted because of their experiences from before and kind of had built these walls around themselves spiritually, we wanted to have the camera sit back a little bit and be more observational in the present day than in the past. And then in the past, there were 2 sort of time periods. There was the events that unfold in the story revolve around an airplane crash. And the past, therefore, is divided into a period before the airplane crash and then a period after the airplane crash. So we chose, so we chose ARRI's DNA primes for the before the crash look. They're a little bit more vintage looking, a little bit more detuned, kind of more 90s is what we were looking for. But they're clean and kind of simple lenses, or you can tune them into a situation where they are simple and easy to use. They flare nicely and have a lot of character. And then once the crash happens, the girls find themselves stranded in the woods. And in the woods, we wanted the forest to become a character. We wanted the forest to be always looming over them. It was emblematic of their predicament, and we never wanted the audience to forget that. So we chose anamorphic lenses in the forest. We went with Atlas Orion primes, and that gave the forest a different character. That everything else was spherical, and then in the forest we're anamorphic. So all the bokeh and the trees, the trees had this kind of eerie, oval-shaped anamorphic bokeh, and those lenses are just incredible. They're really, really great, and it gave the forest that character that we were looking for. And the other thing we did in the forest was always go handheld and always be in close and wide, and almost make the camera a character in the show. And a participant in all the things that are going on, rather than being back and observational like they are in the present day. So those are the kind of things that philosophically I think lead me to decisions with lensing and that sort of thing. In addition to how the lenses are with skin tones and that sort of thing. So lots of decisions, but lots of conversations and working things out. But I tend to drive most of those conversations by providing examples like, hey, I'll go out and test 6 or 8 different sets of lenses and pick 3 and then present those to the director, to the showrunner, and say, let's talk about these ones, and then kind of narrow the field a little bit so that we're not spending 3 weeks, talking back and forth about it.
Yeah. And what's your favorite focal length? I mean, without any preference of a situation or a scene, like what do you like to attract to most? I like
in spherical lenses. There's so many capture formats now. So if we talk in like Super 35 spherical lenses, probably a 32 and a 40 I think are my 2 favorites. If it's anamorphic, then a 65 or an 80 would be in that zone. On large format cameras, on the Alexa 65, the 80 mil focal length is absolutely amazing. It's equivalent to a 40, but it's just 3-dimensional in the 65 format. It's unbelievable. So yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's cool. And when you're working on a film like Welcome to Marwen, it's not complete motion capture, but it's a mixture of both.
Mhm.
Although, I mean, I just saw the film 2 days ago again, just
Yeah.
to refresh my memory. And you know, the actual dolls, not the motion capture part, the actual dolls. What lens were you utilizing in those cases whenever you had like Steve Carell's character in the same frame as the doll, just to kind of give it a little bit of a same, height or significance? What
Yeah.
were you using there?
That's a good question. I'll bet you we were on it's been so long now. I'll bet you we were between the 65. That was the show that was shot in the Alexa 65. So we were probably
Yeah,
on, I'll bet between a 65 mil and an 80 mil virtually all the time on that show when we were doing Steve Carell in the real world with the
yeah,
with a plastic doll in his hand. Yeah. Yeah. And then it really became about camera height and perspective. Bob's a very he's very particular about storytelling perspective, and for every shot, as much as he loves shot design. I mean, he's one of the greatest shot designers I've ever seen. As much as he
100%.
loves that, it has to be motivated and it has to have a reason, and it's not just fancy shot design for the sake of it. It's storytelling shot design. So there's that was a great takeaway for me from that was really focusing on storytelling perspective. It wasn't something that was forefront in my mind before working on that show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think with Zemeckis, one of the things I've noticed, um, I had seen obviously the Back to the Future trilogy, Forrest Gump, Death Becomes Her, Who
Mhm.
Framed Roger Rabbit, but there was a big transition, and I don't know if you've ever noticed that in his approach to visual, to cinematography, even though he's had different cinematographers on different projects depending on the project, is that when I don't know if you remember Contact with Jodie Foster.
Yeah.
There is that opening scene when young Jodie Foster's character it runs up the stairs and to get the medication, and she opens the mirror cupboard,
Yeah.
and from that moment on, every film that I see of his, like What Lies Beneath, Castaway, his camera movements, and when I say his, I don't mean him, I mean, but he's the director, and but yes,
Yeah.
there's a DP. They're
Yeah.
very similar to the way things are being revealed as they're happening. Even in the one that you did, one of the
Yeah.
really, I mean, you probably don't even remember this, but there was a really cool shot that I thought he doesn't like to cut unless there's a need to cut. So
100%.
there is a shot, um, it's maybe halfway into the film, and I'm just forgetting the names of the characters, but the camera is kind of like at a higher point, and there is
Yeah.
this doll sitting on the
Yeah.
swing, and
Yeah.
you can see
Just her
that
leg.
doll
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
out of focus, and you're seeing what's happening, and then obviously the purpose of that was because it was going to come to that doll,
Yeah.
and just the way that is done, instead of cut here or follow the actor here, it's just so well done, and obviously you were part of that too. And how is that with Zemeckis? Like his approach is so different.
Yeah.
It almost reminds me of the Godfather films.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
fact, he's actually said that every time he shoots, directs a movie, he watches The Godfather
Yeah.
one or two or both before. And
Yeah.
what was that like? Transitioning from Flash and all those stuff to something completely different.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, coming from Flash. Yeah, it was the entire experience was a masterclass in filmmaking for the entire period, and being not only a masterclass but being paid to come along for the ride.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
the big, as much as Bob is defines almost a whole generation of filmmaking, and how he shot designs and how he tells a story. He's remarkably collaborative, like exceptionally collaborative, and that comes, I think, from the confidence that he has. He's not insecure about anything, and
yeah,
and without insecurity, there's open conversation. And um, with Marwen, there's a shot at the opening sequence of the film is the fighter going in down in the
yeah,
trees, and then Hoagie climbs out and goes and meets the girls. And then after the Nazis show up and the girls kill the Nazis, there was a sequence that was in the script um, that outlined the scene in which we tell the audience that all of that you just experienced lives in the world of the imagination of this character. And they had all of that lives in the world of the imagination of this character in the real world. And the script had been with Bob for a number of years, and I think it had been through a bunch of rewrites. And I remember reading it and thinking, I can see what we're trying to do here in this particular sequence, but I think it had become so internalized with Bob and the writers that it was, as an outsider looking in, it was a really confusing sequence. And I said to Lee Grummett, our AD on the show, who was the most amazing human being on the planet, I said, Lee, I think I have a pitch for Bob on how to change the shot so that it tells the story, I think, a little bit more efficiently. But how do I tell Bob Zemeckis that I think there's a way to do this that's not what he thought? And Lee said, put it in an email and send it to me first. Let me look at it, and then I'll let you know if you can send it to Bob. So I said, okay. So I typed it all out and sent it to Lee, and Lee said, yeah, that's great. Send it to Bob. So I sent the email to Bob, and he doesn't type a lot in emails. And,
2 words.
What's that?
2 words.
2 words. Yeah. He's like, he replied and said, great, let's test it. I'm like, okay. So, and then he was still in Santa Barbara at the time, and we were up in Vancouver scouting, and he was going to be in town the following week. So I had to come up with this like proof of concept shot thing that with a little, with an A7 in the studio, we built a little set and so that I could show Bob what I meant. And I said to him, I said, I think the story's gotten a little too close to you, and as an outsider, it's confusing. So here's what I pitch. So I did, and he looked at it, he goes, yeah, that makes total sense. So let's do that. So in the movie, the shot lived, which just blew my mind. But in the movie, Hoagie's been rescued by the girls. They kill the Nazis, and then we come out of that sequence and we pull back from that and find ourselves coming through the viewfinder of a still camera. We then wrap around the still camera to reveal Steve Carell as Mark Hogenkamp sitting there. So that tells the story that the previous world that we were in exists through the lens of this camera that belongs to this fella. And as the camera wraps around, it was all a big Technocrane move. As the camera wraps around, Steve gathers up the dolls. So now we understand the relationship between him and his dolls. He puts them back in the little case that he has them in. And as he's sitting down, we kind of wrap the camera around and reveal his environment. So now we're telling the story of who he is, what is important to him in terms of the dolls, how dotingly he was taking care, wiping off the dolls before he put them away. As we wrap around, we reveal his trailer. So we see his circumstance of life. We catch a little glimpse of the world of Marwen that he's built in the background. We don't delve on it, but it's there if you're looking for it.
Yeah.
And then we notice that a moving truck pulls in across the street. So that tells the story that there's someone coming in next door, and it's a shot that sets up the entire film in one shot. It was like a 2.5 minute long oneer, I think it was. Yeah. And he eventually walks into the house. So, so Bob, being the shot maker that he is, but still being open to collaboration and open to hearing other ideas and saying, tell me how we can make it better, and listening and truly listening when other people say, hey, maybe it'll be better like this. I think that's the success that Bob brings, and the confidence and everything that he brings to the table, and then you have ownership. I had ownership of that shot. Our operator Peter had ownership of that shot, and with ownership comes pride, right? So you have pride in ownership, and now you're more invested in the movie, and you want to make it better, and it just, everything just improves as you go along. So, in addition to being a masterclass in filmmaking, it was a masterclass in how to get along with people and how to appreciate people and bring the best forward in everybody on the set. So anyway, it was really, really inspiring process.
No, that's so true, right? Like, when you're growing up as a filmmaker, it's like, I'm the director and I'm that, yeah. But it's all about collaboration. And and it's all about having people on your team that are better than you in a lot of other departments. So
Yeah.
then everybody can bring in their input and make the end product, amazing.
Yeah.
Um, and then working as a, what was the process of the motion capture technology? Was it similar to how Lord of the Rings was done? Like, the in real life environment, other actors with all the suit and the dots, or was it something
No,
different?
no, it was that was a process that we experimented with because Bob wanted to do it a little bit differently. He wanted to break new ground. At first, before I came aboard, they had talked about face replacement, about just doing traditional motion capture in the volume,
Okay.
in the not to be confused with the LED volumes we shoot in now, but the just a gray motion capture volume. Um, the original plan was motion capture and then facial arrays with multiple cameras to capture the performance and then blending the two together. Bob's visual effects producer, Kevin Bailey, is, in addition to Lee Grummet, one of the greatest human beings on the planet. Kevin said, well, let's push the envelope here. Let's do something different. And Bob's always keen on innovating. If you ask him, he's the first one to say, I want to be the one to do it first. Everyone else can come along after and do it properly, but I want to do it first.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that, and then that attitude obviously gets you movies like Roger Rabbit and Forrest Gump and so on. But anyway, they had tested the tests that Bob wanted me to see were these motion capture tests that they'd done. I don't know who shot them. I think maybe Don Burgess might have shot them, but they'd done some motion capture tests and they'd shot the faces of the actors at the same time within the motion capture volume. And then Kevin was basically taking this much information from the photography part of it and then all the motion capture information and building the dolls out of that. And we talked about it. We thought, well, what we know that we want to do it like that because the struggle that you have with animation when you're animating photoreal characters like this or quasi photoreal characters is the uncanny valley, that we know about, in which an audience doesn't trust an animated character for some reason that's psychological. And Kevin and Bob had narrowed it down to, hey, it's because the eyes and the mouths aren't real. And if we can get the eyes and the mouths to be real, then we have a window to the audience. And it's possible in visual effects to make eyes and mouths, the little muscles around your mouth that really convey emotion. You can do that in visual effects, but it's way too expensive and it takes way too much time because it's such minute detail. So we thought if we could photograph that, then that will take us past the hurdle of the uncanny valley a little bit. So we tested right away the motion capture process. So the actors were in gray suits with the motion capture targets all over them in a motion capture ball. And then what we did different was bring our cameras into the motion capture volume as well with them. So we knew that we had to build proxies of the sets of the locations and the sets that the actors were going to act in, so that they could actually block out a scene and actually act out a scene within the motion capture volume that corresponded to a set that was either going to be built later or photographed later, which that brought a whole other set of problems, which we'll talk about in a sec. But the first thing we wanted to know was, is it better for us to just flat light the actors in the motion capture volume so that we get all the detail possible in their eyes and mouths, and then model the light in visual effects once the environments have been created around the animated characters? Or is it better to try our best to simulate the lighting from those animated settings that nobody shot yet and hadn't been created yet, and light the actors as though they were in those environments? So we tested that, and it was better to light them as though they were in those environments. It was much more convincing. You had interactions with the eyes that were a lot better, with light sources and so on. So the next part of the problem then became, okay, now we have to shoot actors in some environments that are entirely digital. So how do we light them as though they're in those environments when those environments don't even exist yet? So how do we do that? And the answer to that was the Unreal video game engine. What do we use for an example? Let's say the village of Marwen.
Yeah.
Was a set that we had built. It was one of these sets that bridged both worlds. We had a digital version of it, but we also had a physical version of it that existed outside the physical set of Mark's trailer. So the art department had built this beautiful little scale model village out of tin cans and little bits of castaway garbage that Mark Hogenkamp had built into furniture or built into churches and so on. So the art department had built this. The visual effects team LiDAR scanned all of it and had a 3D model of that set, basically, that we then imported into Unreal. And then what Bob and I would do on weekends in prep is we would go into a little mini motion capture volume with a little mini camera with a motion capture Sputnik on it. And the Unreal guys would put the environment on screens around us, so we could basically walk through these virtual sets with a screen and have the screen be the camera and look around and see how the world reacted, and then we would take avatars of our characters and have the Unreal guys put them in the scene. Okay, let's start them in the doorway over there, then they walk out like that. So the Unreal guys would render that and the characters would walk out, and we would design the shots virtually by moving our little fake camera while the motion capture information was being logged, and do our shots. And we would record all of our shots, record the close-ups, record the masters and all that. And then we had a kind of a groundwork plan of how we wanted to capture each sequence. And then Bob would go off and do whatever else he does on the weekends. And I would stay with the Unreal guys, and we would look at the environments that we were in and decide how to light them. And so again, using the village of Marwen as an example, at the practical location where we built the set for that, if you stood at the road and looked towards Mark's trailer, you were looking due south. So we knew that in the virtual world, we needed the village to be oriented to match that. So the due south was due south. So now we knew that the sun could go from east over the south, and based on the time of year, what the azimuth to the sun was going to be and where it was going to be at a given time of the day. So we knew based on our schedule looking ahead, we're going to shoot this sequence for real at the location on, July the 17th between 3 and 6 p.m. So now we know that the sun's going to be over there and between there and there while we're shooting the sequence for real. So then we were able to, in Unreal, sort of pre-light it with digital lighting, so that our when we got to the motion capture volume to shoot the actors in their suits walking around, we could just look through our Bible and go, okay, it's scene 17. So now the sun needs to be over there. The sky needs to look like this. We need the bounce from the ground needs to be gray because the cobblestones are gray concrete. We need a little bit of a red bounce over here because there's a red tablecloth. So we basically were able to pre-visualize every shot and then build a world in the motion capture volume that gave us all the proper lighting cues just for this much of their faces. So it was quite a laborious process, but it was methodical and very, once we got into it, it was really cool. I had, so much of the environment around us is influenced not just by the light itself, the source of light itself, but how that light source interacts with the objects around you. Like right here in this room, there's blue sky out there. The sun hasn't quite come around yet, but the light's coming in and it's bouncing off this brown table. It's coming off this orange wall, and all of that influences how the light lands on your face, right? So we had when we were shooting in the motion capture volume, I asked the paints departments to paint big 20 by 20 drop cloths in green to represent grass, or in gray to represent that cobblestone, or brown for dirt, so that we could lay down a big sheet that would bounce some of the light back that we were lighting the actors with and give us a sense that we were in that environment. I talked to Joanna Johnson, our costume designer, who thought I was absolutely nuts, and asked her to make bibs that we could Velcro onto the gray suits that the cast members were wearing in the motion capture volume, that were representative of the colors of the costumes that they were meant to be wearing. So, for example, if Hoagie had his leather jacket on, he had like a brown kind of leathery bib that would Velcro on, so that the light hitting that would bounce up into his chin and be, you know, in the zone of what it would be if it was a real jacket. So there's lots of little details like that that I just love doing, but all of it, you know, comes together to make the end product more believable, right? So, well, that was a long. I
Yeah,
don't
no,
even know what your first question was after all that.
no, this is, you know, honestly, we're talking about masterclass. Like you just gave a masterclass to the audience here that the motion capture technology, you know, we see behind the scenes stuff like of
Yeah,
Avatar, you know, Welcome to Marwen, all the other films that have come out. But it's what you just explained. I mean, it just makes people appreciate the amount of work that goes into it. It's just so much. It's not even about motion capture, even like in a regular film, like
yeah,
how, you know, we're talking about deciding lenses, how that serves a story. Every little minute detail, lighting, how does that work?
yeah,
Blocking.
yeah,
And it's I mean, I'm in the industry and I always get fascinated at the same time, regardless of the time how many have done it. But it's just something that I wish people and audiences understood more, that the amount of effort and work that goes into it.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
just insane. Just
Because
insane.
the devil's in the details, as you know, right? It's always it
Yeah,
just takes that.
100%.
Yeah, like there's a good example of that with Kevin, our VFX supervisor. Again, the when we Bob has this thing where he doesn't, and rightfully so, doesn't like shooting outdoors. If you can avoid it, he'll build a set on stage because it's unpredictable being outside. You don't know what's going to happen. You're at the mercy of the
Yeah.
weather. But there were sequences in Marwen where we did have to be outdoors. Like if we use Mark's trailer as an example, Mark's trailer is across the street from Leslie Mann's character's house, whose name escapes me right now.
Mhm.
Um, and we knew that we needed that physical location. We needed a street between them and all this. So we knew that we had to build that set on location. But we also knew that we had a lot of stuff to shoot there, and we didn't want to be at the mercy of the weather. So we
Yeah.
also built those same sets on stage. So we had interior, exterior of both Mark's trailer and was it Wendy's? Not Wendy's. Anyway, of Leslie's house across the street, built on stage as well, and with blue screen, you know, around them and all that. And I remember we were doing. The point of the story was we were in the point of the story being the devil in the details. We were in color correction and finishing color in LA.
Yeah.
And Kevin Bailey, the VFX super, was there, and we were color timing a scene that we'd shot in the village of Marwen. Leslie Mann's character had come up, and Meredith, oh my god, I forget everyone's names. Anyway, we were shooting a scene that took place in the village of Marwen with real actors, and as we're doing the scene, I said to Kevin, like, I totally don't remember this day. I don't remember Leslie being at that location. And Kevin said she wasn't. This is on stage. I was like, we shot this on, like, that's a comp, like in the background. That's an extension. And he said, yeah, it is. And they had shot such seamless background plates that I was fooled. And Kevin said an interesting thing. He said, you know, a blue screen comp is a blue screen comp, but you know, a good blue screen comp won't win you an Oscar, but a bad one will cost you an Oscar. So I was
That's
like, you
interesting.
know, yeah. So he says you got to do like there's no such thing as a simple blue screen comp. It's got to be done to the absolute best you can because it all plays to the same end result, the same place, the same story.
In some films you can tell, you
Yeah,
know, in some films it's so obvious. Like now I've seen that, right? Like, you know, maybe 20 years ago, people wouldn't know what green screen or blue screen is, but now, you know, even my kids would pick up, oh, is that green screen or blue screen? Like they could tell
yeah,
the background not blending in with the foreground.
yeah, yeah. It's because there's a sense of whether it's schedule related or budget related, but there's always a point where it's like let's just make it. It's a simple comp. Just do it real quick. And that's when
Yeah,
it's to fall apart, right? Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Did you as a cinematographer, DP, did you work or chatted or converse with Steve Carell and the other cast quite often, or was
Yeah, not on the level certainly that that Bob
Zemeckis.
or anybody like that or producers. I always have a jovial relationship with the cast on set. It's important for them to understand that I understand the responsibility of looking after their representation and their image on screen. And I always try to make sure that they understand that I take that seriously and I'm not flippant about how we're photographing. So early on, I try to make contact with cast members and have a little informal, camera test day or something where we can just kind of get to know each other and without the pressure of the whole movie watching us and waiting to move on with the day. And in the perfect world, we did this on Yellow Jackets. We have them come in and just spend a half a day with us, and we can play around with lights, and they can, in an informal environment where they can say, "Hey, I really hate it when lights under my chin," or I kind of like it. This is my better side, for lack of a more cliche way of saying it. But just to kind of get to know the cast in that regard is always important to me because they're trusting me with looking after them. So I want to make sure that they understand that I take that seriously. So and then by the time you get on set, you've kind of been hanging around and it's a more jovial relationship.
Yeah.
Everyone on the show is fantastic, and again that comes from. It all trickles down from the top. When Bob and Jack Rapke and Steve Starkey are all such great people and are just trying to make the best product they can, it trickles not only through the crew but through the cast as well. Everybody's there because they want to be there, and that's the best part of it. Yeah.
And aside from collaboration, I think in any kind of production, the sense of relationships are so important because you have to have that distance from everybody, like the professional and personal, but at the same time, especially with the cast, if they become comfortable with the crew, then even some of the greatest actors, they may not feel intimidated by certain lighting or certain, what I mean? Like it just adds up to everything, and I'm glad that you're able to pull that off with the cast, which really helps, and it shows on camera then, right?
Yeah.
It easily shows on camera when somebody's comfortable or not, or if they're putting too much effort into it, even if the way they shouldn't.
Yeah.
Kim, who are some of your favorite cinematographers that you look up to, or movies?
Well, the old school guys are always, like the Greg Tolans of the world. Bill Butler, bless his heart, just passed the other day. I love everybody's work. There's something to be learned from everyone. I'm a huge fan of Barry Ackroyd, for example. Coming from a documentary background, and I love the way that he photographs things because he's always conscious of having come from nothing, or coming from shows where you don't have time, you have to improvise to tell the story, and you have to find ways to tell the story efficiently without all the toys. I love that. I love I love the stuff that everyone loves, the stuff that Roger Deakins does. But the really special thing about Roger's work to me is that it's always transparent, or he always at least tries to make it transparent. For me, if you're watching a film, and this is also kind of a cliche, but if you're watching a film and you come out and you're going to go, wow, the cinematography was amazing, then I think we've failed to some degree, because
I agree with you.
Yeah. If the audience can go into a film and lose 2 hours of their lives, I think that's the best outcome. That they've just got swept up in the story and the characters, and then and not noticed any of the technical aspects of the film, then I think that's a win. And some films lend themselves to that, like simpler, indie projects kind of lend themselves more to story than to spectacle. If you compare, well, actually, Bob's a good example. If you want to compare use of or showcasing, let's say, of technology, you've got something like Avatar that Jim Cameron's done, which is a technological extravaganza. It's absolutely unbelievable. But on some level, it's the cart pulling the horse in a way where the technology is driving the narrative, and the narrative services showing the capabilities of the technology. And then you look at something like Forrest Gump, that is a seemingly simple. I'm almost getting emotional talking about it. It's a just a simple story about a fella that was in the right place at the right time that wins an Oscar for visual effects, and nobody knew it. Right? So
Yeah.
that to me is successful filmmaking, is when you have no concept of all the stuff that went into it that was so seamless you didn't even see it. You know,
Yeah.
um,
It's
that
it's 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 true so much because I was talking to Richard Francis. He edited Seven, The
yeah,
Rock,
it's,
those films.
yeah,
And I was talking about the same thing, that how there are some films where, even people like us, we would like study, oh, that's a nice shot, or that's, great cut, or that. But even some of the good, like, decent budget films, you get so immersed that by the time the film is over, you don't realize that you never picked on a cut, you never picked on the way the camera was framed. And
yeah,
that, you're right, that's where it's a home run, because
yeah,
everything worked. You were immersed into the story, and every department was immersed in the story.
100%. That was we went and saw 1917 before. I deliberately avoided reading anything about it, learning anything about it
Yeah.
before I could see it. And it was my wife that said, we were like 5 or 6 minutes into the film, and she leans over, and she's not even in the business. And she goes, I don't think they've cut yet. Like, this has been the same shot the whole time. And I was like, what? And she goes, they haven't cut yet. I'm like, surely they've cut by now. And then, and then I started noticing, like, oh, maybe that's the thing with this movie, is that it's all one. But that, there's success in it, because it's like I'm looking for that kind of thing, and I didn't see it because I was more interested in what the actors were doing, right? Like I always tell, there's like you say, with all the contributions from everybody on the set, it's a collaborative process. Everybody has a part. We wouldn't have 160 jobs on set if each one wasn't critically important to the outcome of the film.
Right.
And even something that draws my eye out, and when I'm watching a film, is focus pulling. When you have a two shot, or when you have a shot where there's one actor in the foreground, one actor in the background, and there's focus racks between the two of them. When those focus racks are mistimed or of a kind of an unusual quality, it takes me out of the film. And sometimes, I find myself working with a focus puller that has different instincts than I do with timing focus racks and stuff like that. And the thing I always tell them is, like, at the end of the day, stop doing your job and watch the movie. So instead of waiting for that moment, waiting for that line to send the focus deep, watch the movie. And when you're watching this actor talk, and then he says something, and you look over there, that's when the focus rack happens. It's not, don't force it. Just let your eyes lead you there. And if you get there a beat after the first couple of words, that's fine. You don't have to beat dialogue. Like, that's another thing, like panning from one person to another to land perfectly as they deliver a line takes me out of it, because it's not how the human existence is. You don't, if you're standing in a room and there's 5 people and someone over here says something while you're looking over here, you don't look at him before he says something. You hear the first couple of words and then you look over. So that to me is more, it's all those little nuances of trying to bring the human side to the and blend it with the technological side of it to tell the story. So anyway.
It's interesting you mentioned rack focusing, right? Because I was watching, I don't know what I was watching a week or two ago, and there was a scene where you had a character close with the camera in the foreground, another one in the background, and that was the frame. But despite whatever the character was saying in the foreground, that character kept out of focus throughout that shot. It was always the character in the background, because that character had more important things to say than this one. This one might be saying, yeah, I agree, or you're wrong. Just small sentences. So there's no point in pulling those focuses, because you're right. It will just distract from the message that you're trying to drive out of the character in the background.
Yeah. I think Steven Spielberg is one who very rarely will do a focus rack from
He
one
doesn't.
character. Yeah.
I don't remember him ever using it. He's kind of like Zemeckis too. I think they move the camera and the way they do the blocking. It just works in blocking. They don't need to do all that stuff.
Yeah, that's the thing, and that's I don't want to say it's not a dying art, but that's an art that takes a lifetime to master, if you ever master it, is blocking and staging. and working. And that's been the biggest sort of thing that I've noticed in transitioning from television to uh, excuse me, to doing more features, is that in TV you just don't have time to work out a really nice blocking and
Yeah.
build the story beats into a nice move, especially when you have editorial constraints that they want to be in close-ups all the time in television, which is an antiquated, if you ask me, outdated philosophy. But in features, you get to spend a little bit of time blocking a scene and building a narrative into a single shot and avoiding a cut, because every time you cut, you're risking drawing attention to the process,
Yeah.
which I guess is Bob's philosophy and Steven Spielberg's philosophy also. So yeah, it's that's the beauty of this business, right? Is that there's so many new things to learn and so many new people to meet that all have ideas and so on. So
Yeah. Kim, any advice that you want to give to upcoming cinematographers, and how should they go about doing what they're doing and keep doing what
um,
they're doing?
first of all, just shoot. Find your learn your own voice. It's um, watch other people's work, but find your own voice. That's I think the important thing to me. And the only way that comes is if you just go out and shoot stuff. Whether it's stills, it's a great discipline to take a still camera out and challenge yourself to tell a story in one frame. Look at this has been said 1,000 times. Look at paintings. Look at I always I love the old Dutch masters, Vermeer in particular, which is also such a cliche because everybody loves Vermeer. But everything that he did is every aspect of every frame is there for a reason. It's not like running around with your iPhone and going, snap, oh look, there's a girl by a window reading a book. It's a painting that took who knows how long to do, in which every detail in the frame is meticulously crafted to be there for a reason, for a narrative reason. So that's and sitting there and staring at a painting like that and trying to reason, why is the window opened that way? Why is the curtain flipped over the window in such a careless way? Why is she holding the letter in that sort of careless but yet emotional way? Why is there's a bowl of fruit on the bed that's tossed out. This is a girl by a window reading a letter, I think it's called. But there's a haphazardness to the setting that tells volumes. The more you look at it, the more you can almost smell the breeze coming in the window, and it's, I don't know, that. So learn from what other people have done, but find your own voice. A huge thing is don't be afraid to reach out to people that work in the business and ask for a coffee date, and ask for a conversation. I'm involved with the ASC and with the CSC, both of which have huge mentorship programs that are designed to take emerging filmmakers and pair them with people that do this for a living and with reasonable success. And even if it's just to have a conversation, and then come to set and come hang out for a day and see how we do it when we've got all the means in the world, technocranes and drones and come see what that's like, and then, and then maybe come and visit when we're doing something really simple with no money, but reach out to people, find organizations like the ASC, like the CSC, like whatever the Society of Cinematographers is in the city or in the country that you live in. Reach out to them, because their existence is motivated by helping and pushing the industry forward. So far be it from those associations to be the lofty thing you can never reach. They're the places that are designed to help you get there. Well, if you want to be in the ASC or in the CSC, then reach your hand out, because someone will grab it and yank you up there. Don't be afraid of it. That'd be the
Well said. Well said, Kim. Thank you so much, man, for your time.
Oh, my pleasure.
And for all the words of wisdom and the stories that you told. Hopefully we can have you back on. Maybe we can talk about Yellow Jackets, but first I got to see that before I talk about it. But great to have you on, man.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Likewise, man. Take care. Have a good one.
Thanks.